Today, the conversation is all about self-portrait artistry on Behind the Shot. Hi, as always, and welcome to Behind the Shot, the show where we try and get inside the mind of great photographers by taking a closer look behind one of their shots, from conception to completion, all the stories and challenges that happen in between, with the idea of trying to better understand the choices that they make when they make their art. I do want to remind you that there is a blog post associated with this episode. You can find it at behindtheshot.tv. As well, all the links to subscribe to this show, whether it be in your podcast app or Pandora or YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, all the links are at the website as well, behindtheshot.tv, and you can find the links there for both the podcast itself and me. And that brings us to today's guest. I want to jump right in because today's guest is one of those people I have been chomping at the bit to get on Behind the Shot. Lizzy Gadd, how are you?
Hello, how are you? And I'm doing great.
I'm doing quite well.
To answer that first.
That's okay. That's
excellent.
Right. This is going to be a relaxed, casual conversation because I have been wanting to get you on the show for quite some time. I'm going to be honest. I was not aware of your work before you were on SmugMug Live with Alistair. And when I saw that episode, there's a link for that in the show notes, by the way. When I saw that episode, it was, Alistair, how do I reach her? Alistair, please. It was one of those moments. So First of all, you are Canadian based, so you're in Vancouver, correct. Right?
Yep, Vancouver, okay. BC.
Usually I kind of can describe the type of photographer somebody is. I'm hesitant to do that with you. And I'm going to say it this way. We're not talking about selfies here, people. We're talking about self-portraits at an elevated level. But I don't know that I want to call you a self-portrait artist because you also have the series with your dog.
That is true.
Which is kind of the same type of shots, but with the dog.
Yep.
Random stranger hits Lizzy up on the street. Lizzy, hey, nice to meet you. What do you do for a living? And Lizzy Gadd says what?
Well, I never really know how to explain what I do either. I sometimes just say that I take selfies, but that doesn't sound quite right. So I guess I try to combine landscapes with self-portraiture with kind of an ethereal twist. Yeah, I don't really know how to describe it beyond that. I usually just end up pulling out the photos to show people because there's not really describing it.
And that makes sense to me because I was trying to I had to call my wife into the office here to show her your work because I was trying to describe to her what I saw on SmugMug Live and what you photograph. And I kind of said the same thing. It's these amazing landscapes, but they're not landscapes like a Moose Peterson would take. They're, like you said, they're ethereal. They're almost romantic novel landscapes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They all have this kind of dreamy quality to them. I'm not talking in the post-processing. It's more the scene.
Yeah.
And then you put yourself in the scene. It's awesome. You people will understand if you go look at the blog post.
I'm glad you like them.
Oh, your work is freaking amazing. So the way that I met you, or the way I found out about you is a better way to word it. You were on SmugMug Live with Alistair Jolly, which is SmugMug's YouTube channel where they interview photographers. And I was on episode number 34. The link for that one is in the show notes too. The episode right after me was Lizzy Gadd. And I went and I watched it. And your work is something I would never shoot. And yet speaks to me in an amazing way. And then you were referred to me completely independent. People who didn't know I'd seen that show, Skip Cohen and Larry from Platypod, have referred a number of people to me lately. The last guest right before you, Mitchell Wu, they recommended too.
Yeah.
Recommended you to me. So my question to you is, your work has been described as fairy tale-esque.
Yes.
And the quote that I saw was fairy tale-esque, dreamy, peaceful, and full of wanderlust.
Yeah.
Let's start there.
Okay.
You go to a scene to shoot. Are you thinking that in your head?
Well, I think I feel like when I'm out there in nature, I'm kind of in this continual state of almost like wanderlust and dreaminess, especially when I see the scenes that I see. And there's part of me that is like, oh, I'm going to look back on this and I'm going to feel nostalgic about this. And I want to try to capture this feeling while I'm here in the present moment and just try to capture that magic and share it with everyone else and feel it. And when I'm capturing those photos, it's like being in that moment. It's very kind of a therapeutic sort of feeling where I'm just there in that scene, in that magic and feeling it. And then it comes across on the camera. So most of the
Which
time.
it does. But
Yeah.
I guess that brings in the question though, I'm kind of getting into picture stuff sooner than I normally do, but I'm really curious before we get into all the other bio stuff about Lizzy Gadd, is when you set up your camera and you start composing this, what is effectively a landscape shot. Are you composing it as a landscape shot and then you simply enter the scene, or are you composing it as a landscape shot in your head with you already in it? I mean, when you're standing at the camera, because you're obviously not at the camera when you're taking the picture, right? When you're standing at the camera, are you already picturing you in it? Do you know what, am I making any sense?
You do make sense. And it's interesting that you say that because I'd never really thought about it. It's almost like the two options in my mind are just meshed together. Like I see the landscape and it just comes naturally to me. Like when I'm taking the photo, it could just be a landscape shot, but somehow the way that I set up the camera, it always involves a way that gives me a perfect opportunity to also enter the photo. So yeah, I don't really know how to answer that. It just happens very naturally.
Do you ever just take the landscape? Because I got to say, you'd be just an amazing straight landscape photographer.
A few times I do. And I often take landscape photos and self-portraits at the same time, but like on the same scene, the same setup. And then I end up only sharing the self-portrait ones because those ones connect with me more. But yeah, I guess all the shots I set up are ideal for both.
Well, they connect with other people too. So when I started researching you and I saw your follower count across social media platforms, I'm not talking a single social media platform, but across social media platforms, you have almost 500,000 followers. I mean, like 475,000 followers.
Yeah, that's weird to think about.
Right? I mean, I don't have anywhere near that and probably never will, but I can kind of imagine what it must be. It's got to be like walking through Times Square and seeing yourself on a billboard. There's got to be an out-of-body experience when you realize what you create is moving somebody.
Strange.
Do you ever?
Yeah, I find myself, when I really think about it, and like if I try to imagine that many people in a room or something, or in a stadium, that just blows my mind that many people are following my work. And it almost feels to me like there's two separate people. Like there's me who just spends all my time mostly alone with my dog. And like I have my friends and whatnot, but I am not like a people person. And then
Social butterfly,
yeah. And then when I think about the other me, that's the online presence that has all this following, and I don't know, it's just so weird to me to know that person is actually also me, but it's hard for my brain to wrap around it.
This is a movie script now. The other me, and that person is also me. Your work connects with, and I see why, commercial clients as well. So you've done work for Air New Zealand, Sony, Daily Mail, Canadian Geographic Magazine, Whistler Tourism, which is a place I've always wanted to go skiing, is Whistler.
It's beautiful there.
Oh, I can imagine. Practical Photography Magazine. And this one was interesting to me because this one kind of connected you in my mind to a friend of mine who's a live music photographer out of London, Christy Goodwin. Christy is the house photographer for the Royal Albert Hall. She photographs live music, but she is also an amazing portrait artist. And so she does a lot of promotional stuff for artists as well, but she does tons of book covers. And you do book covers, Nora
I
Roberts,
do. Yeah.
John Grisham. Do you put on a different, I don't want to say hat, but in a way, do you put on a different mental hat if you know you're shooting for a book cover, or do those book covers, you've already got a shot and you're just reutilizing a shot, or do you shoot specific for the covers?
It's all of the book covers that I've shot so far have never been like shooting for book covers. It's just creating my own work. And then at some time later, often years later, a publishing company or an agency that I upload some of those photos to will select those photos to license for book covers. So every photo that I've taken, I've had no like real intention of it being used on a book cover, but then it turns out it actually works out super well as a book cover. So pretty happy about that.
Well, a nice little licensing thing to land on.
Yeah, for sure.
Would you, if John Grisham or Nora Roberts came to you and said, love your work, we've used your shots before, we'd like to actually commission you to do a specific shot for a book entitled X. Do you think you'd approach it differently, or based on the success of past work, would you maybe just go shoot new work the same as you always do? Would you, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it would be a fun challenge to do that, to try to create a photo from like a set of directions or kind of what they want. I would try to recreate with my own imagination. But the thing that I like about all my book covers that I've had before is that they were all like, none of them were based off of what somebody else wanted. It was just all me being in my realm of magical nature and creating just what was coming from my heart, and then having people see those photos and be like, we want to use those. And that makes me the happiest, when I can just create what's flowing natural through me. But I do like the challenge of having somebody say like what they want, and I think that's fun.
Has that happened with the other clients, like the Sonys and Air New Zealands, or were those the same things where it was more licensing for something you already had? Or were there art directors for Air New Zealand over your shoulder?
That was pretty easy, actually. They just flew me over and wanted me to take some photos. They were just like, do your own thing, take photos in our landscapes, show off. And I loved that, because then I got to travel and create what I wanted to create and share that. And then there's been a few clients that wanted me to shoot photos, but like showcasing some of their products or something. So I'd have to get creative and think of a way that I could incorporate, like say a book or something into a photo. And I was like, how would I do that? I'm usually just by myself in nature. And then I ended up creating a really fun photo on a magical sunrise, misty morning, just like holding the book and being lost in nature and looking like I was reading, and it was nice. So
the first thing I thought when I saw your work and I started imagining how would this work in a commercial environment, right? Where it's not just a licensing environment, but it's art directors and this is our vision, and was stuff like North Face or something like that, where you're out in the middle of nowhere and you are, you're wearing a Desante jacket or something. You know what I mean? That would make sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've had a few of those opportunities with some jacket companies before, like Westcomb and a few other kind of outerwear companies. But the opportunities don't come very often. And so
they should. They just should.
Yeah, I'll work with what I can get.
Your work is, your work is so stunning. I really want to know, because again, and for those that are watching or listening, go to the website behindtheshot.tv, the blog post associated with this episode. I have a small gallery of Lizzy's work so you can kind of see, or just go to her website, which is popping up on screen, periodically as we're talking as a lower third if you're watching the video, or it's Elizabeth Gadd with 2 Ds, GADD.com, if you just want to jump over there really quick if you're listening to the audio and you want to see it. But in looking at your work, your style is so unique on 2 levels. It's very unique portraiture, specifically environmental portraiture. It's very unique landscapes. And when those are combined, you end up with these very unique pieces of art. How did a Lizzy Gadd end up picking up a camera and finding this unique style? What led you to this style of work?
Well, I started, I think I was about 12 years old when I saw my first digital camera. My dad had got this little point and shoot digital camera. And I was always into art before then, drawing and painting, always nature, animals, landscapes. And then as soon as I saw this camera, I fell in love with how fast it was just to capture something beautiful that I liked in nature. And I ended up getting my own camera shortly after. And so for the next few years, I was photographing everything in nature that I could find. And then I joined Flickr in 2007. So how old was I then? 13?
Back in
14?
The original heyday for Flickr.
Yeah.
That's when I joined Flickr in 2007 or 2008. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. It's crazy long ago now.
Yeah.
But it almost it feels like yesterday too. It's super weird. I think I was 14 then, because I was, in 2010, I was 16, and I was inspired by these other friends that I were making on Flickr who were shooting self-portraits. And I thought, that looks like a fun challenge. There was this project going around called the 365 challenge of self-portraits. Yep. And my friends were taking a self-portrait every single day for a year. And I got really inspired. And at that point, I'd been shooting for like 4 years. And I knew already that I wanted to be a photographer. That's what I wanted to pursue. But I also knew that in order to grow as a photographer, I would have to branch out and try different things. And I had no set style. I just knew I loved nature, animals, landscapes. And then with this new idea to try something like the 365 project, I had a lot of fun with that. And I still didn't land on my style. Every single photo throughout that year was so different and imaginative, and a lot of them looking back and just oh, what was I thinking? But that was the year that I grew the most, just because I was going out creating a concept or coming up with something new for self-portrait every single day, editing that photo every single day. And when you do that every day for a year, you grow so much in learning how you photograph, what you want to photograph, how you edit. And then it was actually in the very last week, I kind of wanted to end with a bang by going out further to my favorite nature places and really putting in effort, going into the mountains to take self-portraits there for this last week. And all of a sudden, it was the day 365, actually. I was out in the mountains at sunrise. It was minus 10 degrees. That's Celsius. I don't know what that is.
So you lost me at
but
minus 10 degrees. I'm just going to say.
It was freezing, below freezing. And there were these rocks. I was at this lake, and there were rocks going out into the lake. So I walked out. I had on a white dress, and I kind of slipped off the rocks into knee-deep water, and the dress from my knees down kind of froze like solid cardboard around me. But I was so in that moment, it was cold after, but in the moment, I was just so enjoying that feeling of being the only person at this place, and everything was just completely still. There was snow on the mountains coming down to the lake, and it was so peaceful, and I was photographing myself out on those rocks. And then it just clicked in my mind that that's what I wanted to do. I thought I was going to be done with self-portraits by the end of the year, but in that moment, I knew that I wanted to start combining my first love of nature with this new way of capturing this feeling that I get when I'm in nature, which is peace and a sense of calm.
It's interesting to me that you have I kind of wish more people had a specific moment in time that was transformative of their mental approach. Mm-hmm. That they could remember and refer back to. That the idea that you were there and all of this stuff happened with falling in the water and the temperature, that's an amazing process. So many people would have had that happen to them and gone, oh, darn. But you had the wherewithal to keep going and find magic in it. Mm-hmm. Again, minus 10 wearing a white dress, falling in the water, I would argue You may need to talk to somebody. But that in mind, the results speak for themselves, right?
Oh.
So let's talk about this photograph that we're going to talk about a little bit. And I just want to remind everybody, behindtheshot.tv, if you're listening to the audio version, go find the blog post associated with this episode. The video is there too, embedded from YouTube. And you can see a small bit that I wrote about Lizzy. You can see a small gallery of her work, and all the links to everything I could think of Lizzy that I found are also in the blog post. And if you are watching this on YouTube right now, please do, if you like it, give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe and make sure to hit the bell so that you're notified each and every time we release something new. There are some things that we do only on YouTube, and that way you'll get to know about that. So with that, let's talk about this particular shot, which is, I don't even know where to start. There is a name for this shot that you have, I believe. Do you have a name that you called this shot? Because my wife named it for me.
I do have a title, but I actually can't remember what that title is right now.
Okay, I'm going to go with my wife's then. Because when I looked at this picture the first time, I told you I brought my wife in to try and explain to her, and I showed her this shot. And I looked at it and I went, I don't even know what I would call this shot. And she said, Reflections of Beauty.
I do really like that. Yep.
And it just works. This shot,
it's beautiful.
It leaves anybody who's viewing it transfixed with your work. So for those of you on audio, let me take a moment and try and describe this image verbally for those that are on audio. And one day I'm going to actually have the guest do this just to see how it works. But I'll do this one because I don't want to surprise you. It's water. The water goes all the way to the edge of the frame. Let's get that clear. Aside from the boulder that's in the middle of the water, if this was just a landscape without Lizzy in it, this is a picture of water. However, there is a boulder in the middle. The boulder is slightly below the center horizon, which makes sense because Lizzy is sitting on top of the boulder, and which kind of puts her spanning the horizon line above and below equidistant. So there's symmetry there to it. But the water isn't water. The water is nothing. I mean, you literally can't see almost any water. It's a reflection of beautiful orange and blue clouds. So it's not even almost. A quick glance at this, other than the fact that Lizzy and the boulder are also reflecting. If that reflection wasn't there, you wouldn't know this was water. It looks like a boulder floating in the middle of the clouds. And I'm going to get into this in a minute, but Lizzy is on the boulder in a very intentional pose. And maybe I'm wrong, but it's not like she went out there, sat, looked at the camera and went, hey guys, and took a selfie. This is not a selfie. She is in an intentional pose with emotion and meaning. Again, the reflection in the water below her. So let's start with that pose, actually.
Yeah.
The pose works super well, but it's not a studio pose.
No, in fact,
the arms in particular, by the way, the one arm with the hand curled. What are you thinking as you're posing this, knowing you're in your own photo?
Well, this is actually the first photo that I thought about the pose. In all of my other photos, I'm like usually standing or running, dancing, whatever. And this was the first one that felt like more really emotional. And I had this thought when I was going out there that I wanted to take this photo to kind of depict my feelings that I was going through at the time. And I was like, what kind of pose can I make that would get that feeling across in a photo? And then that's kind of the pose that I landed on when I set up the camera and I went out to the rock, and I was like, I kind of want to show like feelings, like going into myself and trying to showcase like heartbreak and finding my own inner worth, and just kind of like finding myself within myself. And that's the pose that came to me at that time. So
okay, so I should have mentioned on the arm. So one of the arms, she's sitting with her left leg curled underneath her. Her right leg is out, knee up in the air, head down at that knee with her left arm coming across, blocking her face. The right arm is limp, palm up on the rock. So there is that mixture here of contortion, confusion almost, relaxation, with that arm being just so limp, almost as though you're asleep. But then the other arm across the face in this kind of inner tension.
Mm-hmm. And I think some surrender in there as well.
Surrender? There's a good description, actually. Wow. Okay. So you're a Sony shooter.
Yeah.
So this was shot with a Sony
the
7R
Sony
Mark III?
A7R3, yeah.
And what lens would you have used?
For this one, I would have used I believe it was my 24 to 70 millimeter 2.8 Sony lens.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in the EXIF data, it shows a 400th of a second at f2.8, ISO 100. So at 2.8 and ISO 100, it wasn't super bright out. It doesn't seem.
No. Yeah, the sun was on its way down. A storm was brewing in the sky. So everything was kind of dim, but with this magical light. And it was only half an hour after I took that, it just started downpouring and lightning and thunder everywhere. And it was beautiful, but I also thought I was going to get struck by lightning with my tripod. And so I had to...
In the middle of the water. Yeah. This is 37 millimeters to kind of set the scene for how wide this is. It's a very comfortable eyesight type, width of the scene. There's a couple things in the EXIF data that confuse me, though. Not confuse me, but make me curious.
All right.
It showed manual mode, makes sense. But I know a lot of people who would shoot this, especially when they're walking out there, that would, do an aperture priority or something. Do you always tend to shoot manual?
Yeah. Well, I usually, I start with autofocus when I'm trying to get the focus on the spot where I want to be. And once I get that focus on there, I'll switch it to manual.
Expand on the focus a little bit, because you're not in the scene, but you're focusing for you, and you're shooting at f2.8, right? Yeah. So with a 24 to 70, so your camera's not that far away, and at 2.8, your depth of field isn't huge. Where did you pre-focus?
I pre-focused. I tried to focus on towards the center, but front edge of the rock, and it took me years to nail this. How do you word it? Ability to focus quickly.
It's not easy.
It's not easy. It's gotten easier. I'd say it's easy now, but it took me 10 years to get to this point. One tip that I can give that I do all the time is my little fuzzy best friend, Pepper. I have him go to where I'm going to sit. Like I had him jump on the rock and sit there for me so that I could focus on him. And then I lock the focus to manual and I call him back and we just switch sides.
Your dog is your assistant. I love it. Dude, jump on the rock for me. Okay.
It's pretty great. But if he's not around or if he's not willing to help me, which happens quite often, I'll focus, like I might put a rock or a stick there that I try to focus on. Or
good idea. Okay.
Yeah. Or with the camera as well, I can zoom in to the spot where I want to focus and I can make sure it's clear and sharp there. And then I lock it on manual.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So you do run your autofocus on manual.
Sorry? Like
your autofocus is also on manual though.
Yes. Yeah.
So when you recommit, you're not autofocusing again as you go to hit the shutter. Okay.
No. Yeah.
It says white balance is set to manual in the EXIF data. Is that normal for you, or is the
yeah, I like to keep everything on manual. White balance, aperture, all of the things. It's funny when we talk about I like to call it the nerdy side of photography because I'm so visually focused. When I'm at the camera and people ask me like what settings I use, I've never in my head, it's been hard for me to be able to say like, oh, I shoot at this aperture, this shutter speed and all of that. That never goes through my head as I'm setting it up. For me, it's like, oh, I just turn this dial this way and this one this way and it all appears magically as it should. And my brain just focuses purely visually on what's happening on my camera. And can't figure out
I like that.
everything else.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
It's feel. It's like a great guitarist doing a solo doesn't sit back and think which note. They tend to just close their eyes and go for it.
So it's interesting
where is this,
whenever.
by the way?
Oh, this is in a Powell River, which is on the Sunshine Coast, a little bit northwest of Vancouver. You have to drive for a few hours, take a couple ferries up there. And so, beautiful area. Right next to the ocean.
Gorgeous.
So that water that I'm in is actually I guess a lagoon of some sort. It's ocean water that came up and filled this big tidal pool, and then the tide started going back out. So it was just water trapped in these rocks. So there were no waves coming in. It was just all still and magical.
Which is evidenced by the reflection, actually.
Yeah.
You go out to take a shot like this. Mm-hmm. You set up, I'm assuming you're on a tripod, obviously.
Yeah.
How many shots might you have to take? Like some of your imagery, you're moving, like you're stepping from one shot to another, and your feet are mid between, which I love. You go out to take a shot like this. How many might you take? And these are just single shots, right? These are not necessarily composites.
Yeah. I'd say for this shoot, I probably took about 100 photos because when I set up my camera, I find the easiest way for me to get these kind of photos is to just use an intervalometer and set it to take photos every maybe 2 or 3 seconds, or if it's like more action shots, like if I'm walking or jumping back and forth, I might set it to every 1 second or half a second. For this, I think it was every 3 seconds. And then once I press the shutter button to go, it'll just continually take those photos every 3 seconds while I go out there, and I can strike a whole series of poses and hope that at least one out of like 100 photos or something will turn out looking kind of how I want to. And there's a lot of good like in between derpy shots, but usually 1 or 2 turn out super good, like what I envisioned. And so once I feel like I probably got that photo, I'll go back and turn it off. And
do you review them right there? Do you chimp the screen, or do you just go, I'm sure I've got it, and you move on?
I usually always review them just in case, because a lot of the time I don't quite get what I want. It's close, but not quite. So then I'll redo it 1 or 2 times more. But and then sometimes
out of 100 shots, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, and then sometimes when I redo it once or twice more, then I go back and realize that my favorite was actually in the first shoot, so I might as well not have done the second ones. But
so when you're shooting 100 shots, you're telling me that you'd only be happy with 1 or 2 of them.
Most likely, yeah.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah, a lot of them, sometimes I get a bunch that I do like, and then it's hard to choose from. And when I take them to the computer, I usually save, like, say out of 100 shots, I might save my top 7 or something. And then I'll choose 1 from the top 7 or so. That will be my main photo. But then a few years later, I might come back and look at those and be like, oh, I can do something with this other photo now from that shoot. So, yeah.
I like it. So let's talk about your composition and prop type stuff, because so whenever I talk to a photographer I don't know, I always go kind of dive into their work deeply to kind of understand a little bit about commonalities in their work.
Yeah.
All of your images, and it's interesting, sometimes they're like, well, yeah, that's all intentional. And other times it's, really? I never noticed that. All of your images have very layered subject matter. Sky, reflections, trees, waters, rocks. There's layers upon layers of actual subject matter. And it's not always an object per se. It's a subject, but it's not always a physical object. Like here, the clouds are really just a reflection, but they're clearly a subject. So when you're standing at your camera before you turn the intervalometer on and you walk out into magic land, what is in your head as you are composing? What is it you are looking for in the frame or in the scene that lets you get that I don't want to go standard landscape, because in standard landscape, it's foreground, midground, background, subject. You break that all over the place. Yet there's always foreground, midground, background. So what's in Lizzy's head as you're looking through the camera going, no, a little left, a little right, a little up? What are you thinking about? What are you going for?
Well, I always like, I guess, symmetry in a lot of my photos. I know a lot of people always talk about like following the rule of thirds and everything. I tend to really like to center myself in my photographs. And I find for me to get that really dreamy element, dreamy feeling in photos, shooting on a really low, wide open aperture, to bring the foreground and the background out of focus, and then me kind of in the centered, and that just draws the attention to me and makes everything else seem quite dreamy. So I always like to kind of layer my photos that way. I can't talk English right now. And
it's optional.
For this photo, it was interesting because for most of my photos, I can kind of layer with like some foreground, say bushes or flowers or something on the ground, and then me, and then mountains in the background, kind of out of focus. But this one, it was just everything around me was just the same, and I thought, oh, this would be magical if I just centered everything like on me, on this rock in the center. And yeah, I don't really know how to explain further.
Okay. But here, well,
yeah.
Which now you understand the difficulty when somebody like me who isn't photographing it tries to explain it to people. It can be tough.
Yeah.
Because I started to say intricacy, but that's not what I meant. There is a level of almost consciousness. I can't speak English either. There's a level of consciousness. Yeah. I'm here to support you. In your work that is just really fascinating. Part of it, I think, comes from your choice of attack angle. So your camera angle is rarely eye level. Your camera angle is either low, like ground level, or here the camera angle is up higher, pronouncedly higher. That could just be because, it was a hill going down to the water. It could also be you're not going to get the reflection of the clouds unless you're at the right angle of reflection, right?
Yeah.
You use space like this. If this were a print ad in a magazine, this is nothing but white space.
Yeah.
Right? It's an empty white page with a rock and a girl in the middle. It's analogous to my favorite ad. I've mentioned this on the show before. It was a Crown Royal bottle, Canadian whiskey.
Ooh, yes.
A Crown Royal bottle at the bottom of a large white 8.5 by 11 or whatever magazine size page. The page was entirely white, very small at the bottom, a shattered bottle of whiskey, and just the text that said "Grown Men Do Cry." And that's what I see in your work is this amazing use of white space. Are you aware of your camera angle of attack and stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, I am actually. When I go out,
during it though?
I think so. It comes really naturally, so I don't really think about it. I just do it. But I do realize that I usually always shoot very low, or if I'm shooting like a reflection in a lake or something, which I've done countless times now, I shoot a lot higher to get that reflection. But I realize that I guess I like to keep my work like very clean and simple so that the eye is like really drawn to what I want it to be drawn to, like myself. But the landscape, like if the camera's at eye level and then it's capturing more of everything around me, I find that can be quite distracting. Whereas if it's down low, then it's like the ground leads into the photograph. It's like kind of blurry. The closer to the ground I am, the blurrier the bottom foreground will be, and that leads into where I am, and then leads into the background behind me. So yeah, I noticed that I definitely try to keep my photos simple in that way, and it depends a lot on the position of my camera.
You mentioned you don't like to follow the rule of thirds per se, and you like to be centered, but I would argue in many of your shots, like you have one shot, which I don't have to pull up right now, but people can go look it up at elizabethgadd.com, where you have like a cliff coming down on the right side of the frame and a cliff coming down on the left, and there's a tree coming out.
Ah, yes.
And you're kind of in the middle, but the hills effectively create, those rules of third.
Yeah, so it kind of works.
There's one thing it does, right?
Yeah.
It works on many compositional levels.
Yeah, and that photo too, I took from the ground. My camera was literally, it was on one of those platypod things, which was on the ground, like an inch above the ground. And that was the only way that I could get that blurry foreground and the grass and like hillsides going up around. If it was even a foot higher, it wouldn't have had that ground going around it that kind of frames it.
It just works. But there is a problem though.
Yeah.
When you look at shots like this, clearly the sun is behind you setting. You'd be in shadow.
Yeah.
Are you adding artificial light? If you don't, do you ever?
I have never added artificial light before. Part of me would be curious to try that out someday. Nope. It's always been natural light. And when I bring the photo like into Photoshop or Lightroom to work with it, I might like kind of draw out some of the natural light that's already there more, but I'll never like add in.
You don't carry a flash with you?
Nope. I've never used one before.
How'd you? But the sun's behind you here. You'd be dark. This was all done. You lightened yourself up in post?
I did, yeah. And I actually have no idea where the sun was that day. It was a kind of weird day of like mixed, like kind of hazy cloud that everything was just kind of bright around. And I was hoping that the clouds would build up and get moodier to kind of even out all the light. So when I took that photo, I was a bit worried how I was going to edit it because I thought it was going to be way too harsh and with the lighting. But then it
makes
ended
me feel
up
so much
being
better
okay.
that you worried about this. So, wow. Okay, so you're good at editing then, because this is super clean. I'm just going to say, super clean at editing. What software do you use? Are you a Lightroom user, Capture One, Photoshop, what?
I am a Lightroom user. Sometimes I'll bring a photo into Photoshop if I want to clean it more, like take out some objects that were distracting. But all the like lighting, working with the exposure, the shadows, the colors, I do all of that in Lightroom.
Okay.
Yeah.
And any apps that you use when you're going out to, trace, like in this particular shot right here, where's the sun going to be when's it setting?
I've never done that before. I've always thought it was cool when I was out with other photographers who like pulled out their apps and they're like, the sun's going to set right there. And I'm like, oh, that's good to know. I should download that someday.
Like Photo Pills is the big one, yeah. Yeah,
and I've still never downloaded any apps, but I should someday. It could be useful.
Okay, you are amazing me here.
You
just walk out and go, is what it is.
Yeah, I generally, I can pretty easily say 95% of my photos I've never planned in advance. It's always just when I'm out there and then very spontaneously in the moment, I'm like, oh, I like how this looks right now. And I set up and take a photo. So
wow,
that's kind of how it works.
Wow, I wish I could do that. I could try that and it would fail. What do you normally do to an image in post? So using this image as an example, not necessarily specific to this image, but what's your general processing?
My general process, well, after choosing the final photo that I'm going to use, I'll bring it into Lightroom. I'll play with the exposure first to try to get it where I want it. I usually bring up the shadows a bit. And then my favorite thing, it could take me anywhere between half an hour to several hours, like 4 or 6 hours until I'm perfectly happy with how a photo looks. Because my favorite thing that I like to do is play with the paintbrush tools. I like to, when I'm trying to bring out the color that I want to see, and because I shoot everything in RAW, so when I bring in the photo, everything looks quite flat. And I like to use the paintbrush tools to kind of paint more color back into the clouds or my skin or what I'm wearing. And I find I think that kind of goes back to before I was even shooting photography. I loved painting and playing with colors, painting on canvases. And so doing that in Lightroom kind of brings me back to that as well. And yeah, so painting and using the, what do you call that tool? I'm blanking so hard right now. It's like the tool. You like bring a circle, brush? The adjustment brush, but
radial.
Then, yeah, the radial filter. I use that a lot as well. Yeah. So much you could do with that.
Love that tool.
Me too.
I use a radial on almost every image I process.
Yep, same. I only just discovered it a year and a half ago. So on every image since I've taken a year and a half ago, I use it.
It's like for me with live music, I usually have it process outside the circle, not inside the circle. So I draw a circle around an artist, but then outside, instead of just vignetting, which I don't tend to do strong vignetting per se, but I'll do dehaze or lower the highlights so that all the stage lights drop, the singer pops forward a little bit. You know, so here I draw a circle around you and the rock and process the clouds that way. These aren't selfies. I mean, these are such artistic portraits, just happen to be the portrait subject is the photographer. What tip would you, because you are clearly one of the best there is at doing this.
Oh, shucks.
What tip would you give somebody who wanted to try, because everybody does self-portraits.
Yeah.
And some people seriously, where they'll set the camera up and they'll go take, this. And they do okay. One tip would you give people to elevate their self-portraits?
To elevate their self-portraits, I would say, well, for me, it was to forget about the camera and just go out there and express through my body language what I was feeling while I was out there. If it was a joyful moment, I would just dance and kind of forget about the camera, hope it was capturing something. But whenever I would focus too much on the pose, knowing that it was being captured, that's when all the poses actually turned out bad or just didn't seem real to me. So I guess a tip for me that I would give is to just go out and be yourself and just be natural and hope it turns out. And also take 100 photos, and at least one photo out of 100 photos will turn out semi-graceful.
Exactly. But that's where the intervalometer comes in, because it lets you just go walk.
Yeah.
And it's snapping pictures if you can forget about it. If Lizzy Gadd were to recommend a photographer people should look up, is there anybody out there right now that you think, oh, not enough people know about person XYZ? Who is it?
There's quite a few, but the one I'll mention today is Laura Zalenga. And she's also an amazing self-portrait photographer. Yeah, she's from Germany, and her self-portraits are amazing. Her body language that she shows in self-portraits, it's on another level, and her work is partly what inspires my work today.
So she does self-portraits too. Interesting.
She does, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, highly recommend.
Again,
and she's a beautiful human being.
Oh, so you know her too. Perfect.
Yeah. I will put a link. Together.
I will look up her website. I'll put a link in the show notes as well, so people can find that. They'll be in the show notes on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. But Lizzy, thank you so much. There is a blog post associated with this episode, of course, at behindtheshot.tv. If people want to find Elizabeth Gadd, what's your website?
Website is elizabethgadd.com. Pretty simple.
Okay, makes it easy. And it's Gadd.
Gadd.
Instagram is just Elizabeth Gadd.
Yep.
Facebook, Elizabeth Gadd Photography. Are you on Twitter? You're not on Twitter, right?
I am on Twitter, but I've been on Twitter for maybe 12 years, and I think I've tweeted a total of 18 times. So you could follow me, and you might see something, or you might not.
Okay, so it's Twitter is the surprise bucket.
It's the surprise bucket. I believe that's also Elizabeth Gadd.
Okay. And then you have a Patreon account.
I do, yeah.
Which is Elizabeth Gadd. Tell me about Patreon. What do people get when they sign up for Patreon with you?
Well, I started the Patreon account to start sharing more behind the scenes and some editing tutorials, because I've had a lot of people asking for that from me. And at the beginning of the year, I had just started setting up more workshops and teaching one-on-one workshops. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. So I quickly switched to making a Patreon account where I could share some of the things that people wanted to learn in a more accessible way and super easy, that they can sign up or subscribe for the fee of their choice, like could be $1 a month or $5 a month. No matter what you choose, everybody will see the same content. I haven't divided it into this person who pays more will see more. For me, I'm just like, no, I'd rather everybody just see the same thing. It's easier for me to just share
it's
to
just
everyone.
a level of what they want to support.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And that's where I share things, tips and tricks and articles that I've written and tutorials. Yeah.
Well, again, first of all, let me just remind everybody, blog post associated with this, behindtheshot.tv, blurb about Lizzy, all of Lizzy's links, including to the SmugMug live show that you really must see. Not only that, but while you're there, subscribe to Alistair's SmugMug Live, because really he's had Matthew Jordan Smith, and he's had just tons of amazing photographers.
So many great people.
You do that.
Yeah.
Oh,
so good.
I don't know how he gets the people he does, except with Flickr and SmugMug.
Like
that doesn't hurt.
Every second day or so, I see him talking with somebody else who I admire, and I'm like, how did he get this person on?
I know. It's amazing. And not only that, he's an amazingly nice guy. He and I click like that.
He's one of my favorite people, hands down.
Yeah, just a super sweet guy.
Yeah.
So, Lizzy Gadd, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure.
It has been my pleasure, no question about it. And everybody, I cannot suggest it enough. Make sure you head to the website, find the blog post associated with this episode, and give Lizzy a follow. All the links are there. You can see a small sample gallery of her work. You can go watch. I've got a link to that SmugMug Live, her portfolio, her Patreon, some interviews that she's done otherwise. So head on over there. Again, it's behindtheshot.tv. By the way, I do want to remind you, you can, while you're there, subscribe to the podcast in a myriad of different ways. Pandora and Stitcher. I'm on Amazon Music now. You can find me wherever you get your podcast apps. And when you are looking in your podcast catcher application, if your podcast application supports only audio, there is an audio version of the podcast. It makes it easier if you go at least look at the picture at the website. If your podcast application supports video, there is a video version of the podcast that you can go get there as well. And of course, the video is also up on YouTube, Behind the Shot on YouTube. If you are watching on YouTube, again, please click a thumbs up if you like the video, and make sure you subscribe and hit the bell. That way you are notified each and every time that we release something, such as the critique shows I do with my buddy Don Komarechka, another Canadian. And Don is a macro genius, and he and I do critique shows once a month right now. And we pull those images that we critique from the Behind the Shot Flickr group. So if you go over to Flickr, you can have a free account, paid account, doesn't matter. Join the Behind the Shot group, submit your images to the group, join the community, have some fun. If you want them in the pool we choose from for the critiques, make sure you add a Flickr tag, not a hashtag. Flickr has their own tagging system. The Flickr tag BTS critique. That way we don't critique somebody's shot that isn't explicitly looking for a critique and hurt somebody's feelings or anything like that. So once again, to today's guest, Lizzy Gadd, thank you so very, very much for being here. This is Behind the Shot, the show where we try and get inside the mind of great photographers like Lizzy to better understand the choices that they make. I'm Steve Brazill, your host, and we will see you on the next show.